Insert funny intro joke here. Actually, let's not. We have a lot to cover. Let's get right on into it. Before we begin, let me show you my new favorite feature, bar none. I would like to refuel this train. I'm going to click on fuel. There's 3 slots here. I'm just going to hold shift and click and drag. Let's see that again. Here's a chest. I'm going to hold shift and click and drag. There is now item zooping in the game. It's amazing. Every part of Factorio should have this. To start, we're going to go over how track gets laid. There are some pretty significant differences here. First off, you can make smaller curves in the rails. In order to see that, we'll use the rail planer. I'll use the pipette tool to put the rail on the cursor. I'll click on the green arrow, and now we're in the rail planer tool. Watch what I can do now. I can make a subtle curve, and then I can make a subtle curve the other way. And now I have 2 rails that can actually merge here. There are some implications about where you can put rail signals and chain signals, but in general, there are a lot more places that it'll allow you to put regular signals and chain signals. On the right, we have the old rail. As you can see, I've only got a couple of places to put it, mostly along the center here. And along the left, we have the 2.0 rail. As you can see, there are many more options. The reason this works is that there's more angles for the rails now. As you can see, each one of these directions has been broken up into 4, and if you put them together, you get these nice curves here. And if you take a look, you can actually see exactly where you can put the rail signals. Definitely worth experimenting. It's kind of cool, actually. There are some implications here. As you can see, I have 2 loops here. The inside ring is the tightest loop that you could make in Legacy, and the outer loop is the tightest ring you could make in the current system. That is to say, you can't make a turn as tightly as you used to be able to. The turn radius is now 1 rail width wider. This is a bit of a downside, in as much as you can't take this outer ring here and make a chunk-aligned turnabout, but the flexibility that you get otherwise is much better. As a side note, I will point out that at some point, and I'm not quite sure when, Wooba hasn't announced it, the legacy rails will be removed from the game, so do be aware that at some point old save games that use these will break. That is not going to be the case for the initial release of 2.0, indeed it's really no time soon, and we should have some warning. However, for all of my Pionodons and Space Exploration / Crastorio 2 players out there, well, just be aware. Here's some things about the rail planer and the ghost rail planer. Let's say I wanted to make this. Well, if I go over to here, hit Q, click on this, we now enter the rail planer, which is fine, but you might notice that this is fairly fidgety. If I go down here, okay, sure, I got a nice big curve, and I have this huge area where I can wave my mouse and get that curve. Once I go up here, now we start getting a whole bunch of different weird options for where this thing might want to go. And this might not be the thing we're looking for. Maybe we're trying to make this kind of curve, but up there, say. Here's how it works. The rail planer has a couple of different modes. I'll cover 2 right now, and I'll talk about the other 2 in a minute. One, this mode right here, where if I click, it simply lays the track down, and it's good. Let me undo that. The other option is if I hold shift, and now a couple of things can be seen. First off, and most obviously, this thing is going kind of berserk. You'll notice that it'll do anything it can to get to the place where my cursor is. However, you'll also notice that the green tinting suggesting the construction network is active. If I click here, you'll notice that instead of building instantly, it made a set of construction requests to my bots. Those are the 2 primary modes of using the rail planer. You can distinguish between them by holding shift. Let me undo this. Oh, and here's a fun thing. If you wait longer than a minute and you go to undo something, it'll actually give you a dialog here asking you if you're sure if this is something you want to do. It'll tell you what surface it's on, it'll tell you what's actually being deconstructed, and it'll show you a picture of what's going to happen. This is a subtle change, but it is going to be big. At least if you play as badly as I do. In order to make this less fidgety, we're going to make one changing to our key bindings. We're going to go to Settings, Controls, and we're going to search for Rotate. What we're going to do is observe that we have rotate and reverse rotate set to R and Shift R. What we're going to do is set the secondary key binding to Shift plus mouse wheel up, and the other one to Shift plus mouse wheel down. Then we're going to go to Zoom, and we're going to unbind these 2 by simply right-clicking. I clicked too far. I'm not editing that out. Anyhow, what that does for us is if I click here and I bring this back out, if I hold shift, it goes into this weird noodly mode. And now, because I'm holding shift, I can scroll the mouse wheel up and down, and it will actually rotate the segment of rail at the very end. And this will give me different shapes. So for example, I could rotate like so, bring it out just a bit so I get this kind of a curve, and then move this up and down, and it will continue to move along the track with this exact curve. If I go too far out here, you can see the angle changes. And if I go too close, well, it goes crazy. Oops, I accidentally clicked. Perfect. The other two rail planner modes are similar in that they'll create ghosts that the bots will build, but they do so in kind of opposite ways. To start, we can go into rail planner mode, hold Control, and now this is going into obstacle avoidance mode. And the idea here is that it's essentially going to go around whatever it finds. Unfortunately, because we're holding Control, we can't do that rotation trick like we did earlier, but them's the braking force 7. Researched. However, you can usually tell if something's going to work or not by whether or not it puts a giant loop in it. Like if I go far enough out here, it'll be fine. If I go too close, I have to get a giant loop in order to get there, and it's going the wrong direction. So if you see something like this, that generally just means you have to loosen it up a bit. The other mode we saw in our previous video. If I hold Control and Shift, now I get Superforce building. Pretty much exactly what you would expect. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the rail planner because that was a lot of different modes. In fact, I'll give you a tip on how to remember them. If you go to Settings, Interface, and click on Show Mouse and Keybind Control Hints. Now when you hover over something, if you look in the lower left, you can see a little thing giving you hints as to what you can do with it. If I hit Q, and then click on the little green arrow, now you can see all the different modes I can use. Do note it won't show you the secondary keybinds, which is what we set earlier, but still, it should give you something to jog your memory. By default, it's just this regular mode here. If I hold Shift, it'll now go into the crazy ghost build mode. If I hold Control Shift, it'll go into Superforce build mode. And if I just hold Control, it'll go into obstacle avoidance mode. Another thing to keep in mind is we can flip horizontally and vertically. So if I copy this, I can press H, and we've now flipped it horizontally. Then I can simply paste it, and there we go. This can be very handy if you're trying to create rails that need to look the same on both sides. Maybe it's a loop, maybe it's some kind of interchange, I don't know. But sometimes you have to fidget a whole lot to try to get something to look perfect, and instead of doing that same fidgeting on the other side and then trying to observe, do I have this right angle here or this one here or whatever it is, instead you can simply flip it and paste it and move on. Do bear in mind that the second you add a rail signal to this though, you cannot flip it. So for example, now that this is here, if I copy this and then I flip it, well, it won't let me do it, either vertically or horizontally. Another fun thing, if you don't care and you just need to get that rail going somewhere, you can actually do this from map view. To do this, I'll pipette some rail on my cursor. I'll go into the map. And now I can actually go from any of these and use the rail tool. If I click, you can see I've got the normal method of it being short but permanent and quick. Or I can zoom out, hold Shift, and woohoo, we're going over here. I mean, I guess we're here now. That's great. A nice but small quality of life detail, you can now copy and paste settings from train stops from the map view. It works just like with recipes and assemblers. You shift right click to copy and shift left click to paste. I don't know who Kevin McKenzie is, but I guess there's 4 of them now, so hopefully they're a nice person. Also, as a bonus tip, from the map view, you can also pipette whatever's on the ground, not necessarily the entities, but instead the tiles. If I hover here and I hit Q, you'll notice I get concrete. You can also see the robot ghost icon, meaning if I place this, they'll just be the construction commands for bots to do, but still, it's pretty cool. You can't really do entities from here. If I hit Q here, you'll notice it gives me the concrete that's under it. If I go over here to some solar panels, I hit Q, doesn't work. If I go over here, this is a roboport, and I hit Q, doesn't work. Looks like it's just concrete and things you can put on tiles, and landfill and that sort of thing. Another fun thing is that you can drive the trains remotely from the map view. If I go into here, I can click on this train, and I can say drive remotely. Pretty cool. You can drive your trains without fuel now. I've got no fuel in this. And yet I can drive it very, very, very slowly. Very useful for when a train runs out of fuel outside your bot network. Unfortunately, if a train has no fuel, you cannot drive it remotely, but you can press G to enter the vehicle. Unfortunately, it's not letting me drive it. You can only do this from the zoomed in map view, not the zoomed out view. But if it's in your bot network, you can actually send fuel requests to it. And your bots will go fill it up. Also, there's some new alerts. If you try to send a train and there's no path for it to go forward, like if I try to send this here, you'll notice the new no path symbol and it shows up as an alert. You can click on this, go to here, and you can see the map of where it is. You can add a pin. You can look at it again on the pin here. There's just all sorts of ways to figure out where this train is. To explain the next stuff, I've set up a bunch of train stops. As you can see, I have 3 of them named iron or pickup, but I've used rich text. This one's the fuel station, this one's whatever, and these are the parking lot. This is a bit of a fine detail, but it's kind of important, especially if you have a larger base with a bunch of train stops that share the same name. Let's say for the sake of argument, I've got 2 iron mines set up, and I want to build a 3rd one. Right now, if you look at these, you can see I have a train limit of 1. What I might like to do is to put a new one here, and if I name it, you'll notice it copies the train limit over. If the train stop color had been different, that would have copied over too. That's because the name I picked here is one that was already taken and had a train limit associated with it. This solves a sort of obscure problem. Basically, you would set your train station name and the train limit wouldn't be set properly and you might get a train sent out to your station. This sort of helps mitigate that. Train stops can now have a priority set to them. They all default to 50, but if I needed to, I could set this one to say 40, this one to 80, and this one to 40. And now this middle one will get a train first, and then these other 2 will get a train whenever. The way it'll play out, if I go to this train, and I tell it to go to the iron pickup, and I hit automatic, it'll go to the train stop with the highest priority. If I send another train out, it'll now go to the next station. Another new feature is we can now color the trains on the way to the station. So I've set up a uranium mine here, and because of that, I've set this train station to be a color of green. If I copy and paste this, all 3 stations have this. Now I can go to this train. If I click the color, it'll say use destination train stop color. Fun fact, by default, this is set to true. Now, if I set this to go to the uranium pickup, and I hit play, it'll turn green. In this way, if you color your train stops, you can always know where a train is going based on what color it is. Some of the most exciting changes deal with trains themselves. Here I've got things set up as if this was a copper mine. Let's go ahead and see what setting a train schedule looks like in 2.0. We now have train groups. That is to say, you can make a schedule and apply it to multiple trains. We'll name this one copper train. Some things haven't changed. We can still craft a schedule like normal. And this would pretty much behave normally. I'll copy and paste the settings. And now these trains are members of that group too. If I change the schedule on any one of them, it'll change it for all 3. However, there's a problem with this. We always have to make sure we run fuel to these stations, but that might not always be convenient. What we normally might do is to set up a refueling station. All we have to do is set this up somewhere where we have fuel, and the trains can refuel themselves here. But the problem is, now they have to go from the pickup to the drop-off to the refueling station every single time. This wastes time and fuel. Well, we now have something called an interrupt. What interrupts are is a way to alter the schedule up here based on what's happening with the train itself. Let's take a look. I'll add an interrupt. As you can see, I also have interrupt groups here. I'll make a new one. And now we can edit this interrupt here. What I can do is essentially set a condition that says when the train is low on fuel, go to the station that'll give it fuel. To do that, we can use a condition here. You can see these conditions more or less come from the kinds of conditions you use for trains. There is one to note here, destination full or no path. You can use that to send a train to, say, a depot if everything that it wants to normally do is full, like all the drop-offs and pickups are full, and it has nothing else to do, just head to the depot. Anyways, the 2 we want to look at are fuel all locomotives and fuel any locomotives. If you say fuel all locomotives, it'll look at all the fuel the locomotive has, useful for when you say you have one-sided trains that have 3 locomotives in front. And if you look at any locomotives, it'll essentially look at each one individually. If you have a 2-headed train like this, you probably want to go with any, because if either one of these run out of fuel, then you're kind of sunk. So that's what we'll do. Now we can set this to any particular type of fuel. Let's say I have solid fuel. Right now you can see that little 2 there. What that's telling us is that's how much fuel is in the train right now. This is not less than 0, so right now it wouldn't do anything. Let's go ahead and click on this and set it to something like 5. How much you need here will depend on how big your network is, but your mileage may vary. Anyways, if this condition is ever met, it's then going to take whatever station we put in here and add that as a temporary stop in our schedule. So let's add the station we want. That's the fueling station, this one right here. We can add a wait condition. We can say fuel any locomotives just the same. And we can say solid fuel is greater than, oh, I don't know, 40. And there we go. Now we can save the interrupt. Let's go ahead and check the fuel. We have 2 solid fuel in here. That's less than 5. So if I set this to automatic, it should drive to the fuel station. Cool. Things to note about interrupts. If I go ahead and make a new one, you can actually allow an interrupt to interrupt an interrupt. Yo dog, I heard you like interrupting, so I interrupted your interruption with a yo dog, I heard you like interruptions. I am going no levels deeper with that joke. Basically, all this does is if you have an interruption, this will allow you to interrupt the interrupt, which essentially just adds another temporary train stop to the top of your stack. This next feature is like a combination of parameterization and trains. To see it, let's make a new interrupt. This time, we'll give it a name Parameterized Drop-Off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an interrupt condition, and I'm going to say item count. Now, normally, I can simply click on this, and we'll get whatever items we have in the game, and we can pick it and have the train take it there, whatever. However, we've also got this, and here is something special. This is an item parameter. Essentially, this is a wildcard signal. Just to read the tooltip, when used in a scheduled interrupt, it'll match the first item that passes all wait conditions and replace the signal with that item. This also replaces the rich text tag in the target stop name. So if I click on this, now we're going to say, is this condition true whenever this thing gets filled in? What'll now happen is if I ever put cargo in this train, the first thing it sees is going to get filled in with this, and then the interrupt will activate. Let's set a target, but we have to be very careful here. Anytime I use a parameterization icon inside of an interrupt, I need to have one inside the condition and one inside the target. Those two things are going to change simultaneously. Essentially what happens is something changes with the train, like in this case the cargo, then it looks in the target and tries to find a parameterization icon that matches and fills it in. If you don't have both, it won't work. Because there's no way I just lost half an hour of editing trying to figure out what was going wrong, and then that was the problem, and then I'm questioning why I'm making tutorials in the first place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this. I have to give this a very specific name that involves this wildcard. I'm going to come here, set the wildcard. As you can see, we have other parameters. I'll talk about those in a sec. But for right now, we'll just set the item parameter. And I'm going to type the word drop off. As you can see, this wildcard here matches this wildcard here. Now let's just add a wait condition, empty cargo. Save interrupt. Now I'm going to set this to automatic and it's not going to go anywhere. The reason is there's nothing in it. If I put copper in here, you may have to toggle manual and automatic again. But if you do, it'll go. Cool. You can also parameterize the fluid count, like so. This is going to be the shortest YouTube chat. One thing that was true in 1.1 that's still true here is that you can hook up train stops to circuit networks. Let me put down a constant combinator. And as you can see, you get a whole bunch of options. Some of these things are obvious. We have enable and disable here. This is a circuit comparison, just like any other. Also, under the hood, what this is doing if you disable it is simply setting its train limit to 0. More on that in a moment. These signals here govern what happens. So for example, if I want to set the priority, I have to go to the signal P and give it some kind of a number. So let me go to my combinator. I'll set it to P. Let's go ahead and say, oh, I don't know, 60. And if I click on the train, you can see it's seeing a signal of 60. The fact that it's showing the signal value here is also new in 2.0, but it's not setting the priority because I haven't ticked the box. And as you can see, our priority is still 50. If I click on this though, it grays out because we can no longer set it, but it shows that it is 60. Personally, from a usability standpoint, I would actually make this white text to let us know that this is what's actually happening. This being a bright white would let you know that it is actually that value, as opposed to dark gray, which kind of implies, well, it's nothing. But that's just me. At any rate, we can also read the train count. Right now, it would be 0, so that's why you see no number here. We can't really set the train count. As you can see, I've set a circuit signal to 1. But as you can see, it's not actually seeing that, and that's because this is more or less the source of this C value. And right now it's 0, meaning it's not going to put a number here, and that's because, well, there's no train. That's the difference between a circuit signal that allows you to set it and one that allows you to read it. To be clear, this sort of letter system is something that's universal to most circuit network connection thingies. If I click on the roboport, you can see I've got a whole bunch of stuff that can be read. Things that can be read from these sort of entities allow you to set enable or disable conditions for things like inserters or other entities that do stuff. Or in the case of a train stop, it allows you to set the priority. Basically, the way it works is that something puts that signal on the network. Those can come from constant combinators, chests that are set to read contents, or entities that have read statistics. And then something else uses it. Anyways, a quick note on the train limit. If you set this to 0, either by disabling the stop or just by setting L to 0, any trains that are on the way will complete their journey and actually arrive at the station, so they don't just stop mid-journey in the middle of your tracks. However, if a train is stopped somewhere and it tries to go to a station that has train limit 0, then it just won't start the journey and it'll say destination full. Yet another thing to help prevent deadlocks. We can also use the circuit connection to drive a parameterized interrupt. To do so, I'll click on this train. I cleared the parameterized drop-off just for the example. Add an interrupt condition. I'm going to pick circuit condition, and here, I'll select signal parameter. I'll change this to greater than. And now, if I send this train a signal that has anything greater than 0, then it'll trigger and we'll go to the target. Because I'm using a train parameter here, I've got to use one in my target. I'll pick signal parameter and blargle. I picked blargle just because it's different, and you can see on the map here I have steel blargle. Now I just have to add the wait condition empty cargo, or whatever, and I can save the interrupt. Now I just have to send this train a circuit signal. The way I have it set up is I have this constant combinator sending a circuit signal to this train stop, and I have send to train ticked for the train stop, so that way it'll send the circuit signal to the train itself. I've also got this constant combinator sending a signal down here for a reason I'll share in a second. But basically this stop also has send to train set. And so basically the stage is set. All I have to do is send this thing a signal, and that signal will fill in the parameter here and for the target name. And if everything works, we should be good. So I'll set this to steel as 2. Now it's set to automatic, but it's not working. That's because it's going to wait for this condition to be met before it will go. The reason I had to send the signal to this one down here is because I'm about to send the train there. When it goes, it'll complete this thing here, and then it'll check for the interrupt. There we go. It's now got an interrupt. It's going to blargle. It immediately has empty cargo, and so it continues on. But as you can see, it works. It is a little fidgety. I will say if you're trying to set one of these things up, toggling it from automatic to manual doesn't work. Try setting it to a station that has empty cargo or something like that, where it'll immediately just go, and it should work. You can also use blueprint parameterization in this. Definitely go check out my video on circuit network updates. I've got a link in the description. It'll explain how parameters work so that the rest of this makes sense. To start, I'm going to show you an option in the menus that'll help. Go to Settings, go to Interface, and make sure that you have Show Parameters and Selection Lists checked. This is for advanced users, but if you're watching this video, you're an advanced user. If this isn't checked, I click on this, I go to here, and you can see I don't have parameters. But with it checked, all of a sudden, I have parameters. Now you can, of course, just set a signal and parameterize it inside the menu, but this will save you a step, otherwise known as a failure point, as you'll see in a second. Anyways, this stop name is copper ore drop-off, although I've used the rich text icon here, which will become very important in just a moment. Let's go ahead and take a blueprint, go to parameterize, and as you can see, I have the value coming in from the constant combinator. I've also got the number coming in from the constant combinator. I'm going to put these next to each other. I've also got the 4 values from the train stop, but I've also got the rich text icon here. This is huge because I can, of course, make these two things match. I'll change the rich text copper ore icon to the rich text parameter 0 icon. I've got a parameter of 0 here and a parameter of 0 here. I'll blueprint. And as you can see, it smushed them together. This means they are now linked. This is the squishing I was talking about in my previous video, and any changes to one will change the other. It also sets it automatically to parameter, which in a process that has this many little tiny steps is huge. So I'm not going to go over too much detail about what you could set here. I'm going to let you sort of make those decisions because this is a designing game and, well, that's the fun part. So go design something with this. Here's a fun little trick I used while I was making this video. So as you can see, I have 3 stops all with the same name. Let's say I wanted to do an example of an iron mine. I can highlight the icon here, select iron, and now if I mouse over this, you'll see I can hold Control and it'll rename all stops with this name to this new one. Now, you can see I have 3 of these. If you hover over a station, you can actually see the path of any train that's on the way to that station. If I click on the station, You can also see there's a new list, trains on the way. There they are. Clicking on each one of these will take you right to that train on the map and open up the train details right here. You can also go to trains with this stop. This is what most of us are used to. If I go to this train here, you can actually go edit the train stop by clicking on this here. I guess it just goes to it on the map. So fine, cool. You can also click on a train and hold Control, and it'll try to send the train to wherever you're pointing. If you point at a station and click on it, it'll go to that station. All of these changes put together essentially are trying to make it so that you can more or less control your entire train network from the map. I've given you a whole bunch of tips and pointers here, but the honest to goodness truth is, when you get your hands on it, just play with it and see what you can do. I've been doing this so much, I've been blurring what is and is not a new feature, so if some of these things existed before, forgive me. This next part technically constitutes a spoiler, but it has the same spoiler energy as, say, the display panel, which is a new component that's added. The only reason I'm saying it this way is because this is something that's added in Space Age, which is the DLC you have to buy, and it's not included in the free 2.0 update. But that being said, this is still something that is a train thing, and so I'll mention it here. Still, if that's too much, well, that's the wording. Anyhow, without further ado, I give you elevated rails. That's right, you can now have rails on 2 different levels. There's actually not a ton to explain here because these behave very intuitively. You have these things called rail ramps. They essentially just take your train and go up. You can use the rail planner to extend like normal. You can go about 4 rail units out before you have to add a support, but it'll add it automatically. You can add signals and chain signals to it, just like everywhere else. Unfortunately, you can't put a train stop up here, but that's because you really can't put anything else up here. There's no other entities or tiles that would make sense. So if you want to put a train stop, you'll have to put it on the ground like normal. You can actually partially put the ramps in water, which makes it a lot easier to go over water. And happily, they also go over cliffs. The rail supports come in a number of different rotations, and you can more or less hook them up as you would expect. Couple of details about using force and superforce building. If I click on this, it complains like normal, it can't go any further. If I hold shift, it'll use force building and it'll actually put landfill underneath the rails. If I hold control, it'll put all the necessary elevated rail stuff over. Also notice it includes the support too. Remember, control is obstacle avoidance, and I guess it's technically avoiding the lake. And if you hold control and shift, you still get superforce building, but that just puts the landfill down and will just take out any entities along the way. One last detail for elevated rails. If I go into the rail planner and I press G, it'll change what rail layer it's going to build on. There. And as you can see, it said rail layer switched each time. And that's basically it. I mean, they're really cool. They allow you to sort of build a second tier onto your base, but that's all there is to cover. Anyway, that's all I've got for you for this video. That's all I've got. This was a really long video. I worked really hard on it. If you'd like to support me in doing this, please visit my Patreon. Link is in the description below. I had to make this video forth. I essentially had to use concepts from the previous videos in order for some of the things in this one to make sense. I mean, heck, we talk about how train networks and circuit combinators work together with parameterization. Good lord. That being said, the release as of the time of publishing this video is tomorrow. I'll be continuing to make little videos in this series because they go really fast, as opposed to my Blender tutorial series, which I'm still doing. So do keep an eye out for those in the future. I'm still doing my Space Age playthrough on Twitch, so if you want to come see me do that, by all means. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you in the next one. Oh hey, didn't see you there. I put down a whole bunch of rails. I mean a lot of rail. I mean a lot of rail. I mean a lot of rail. Woohoo!